I know, it seems ordinary, right? Just a man, standing against a plain wall. His clothes are simple, his expression is calm, almost peaceful. You might scroll past it in an old family album and think nothing of it. But this photograph is unlike any other ever taken, because it's a picture of a ghost. A man who, for all intents and purposes, was already dead when the shutter clicked. This single, grainy image holds a secret that unraveled a century-old mystery. A secret that began with the most desperate request a person can make. This is the story of what a man saw, just moments before he was meant to vanish from the earth forever. My name is your name, and this is a story about the shadow that hangs over all of us, the shadow of a forgotten past. It's about a man named Tom, though that wasn't his real name. No one knew his real name. In the cold, gray silence of a Wyoming prison in the winter of 1889, he was simply known as Inmate 247. He was a horse thief, a drifter, a man with no family and no friends to claim him. His entire world had shrunk to the four damp walls of his cell and the heavy, rhythmic ticking of the warden's clock, counting down the seconds to his hanging. The air in the prison always smelled of boiled cabbage and despair. It was a thick, cloying smell that clung to your clothes and your lungs. For days, Tom had sat on his cot, not speaking, just listening to the far-off shouts of other inmates, the jangle of keys, the slow drip of water somewhere in the stone corridor. He was a quiet man, which made the guards even more uneasy. They expected rage, or tears, or begging. But Tom just had this stillness about him, like a deep, frozen lake. The night before his execution, Warden Jameson came to see him. Jameson was a stern man, built like a barrel, with a mustache that seemed to bristle with authority. He stood outside the iron bars, his lantern casting long, dancing shadows that made Tom's cell look like a cave. "Tom," the warden said, his voice echoing in the quiet. "It's custom. Your last meal. What will you have?" Tom didn't look up from the floor. He was tracing a crack in the stone with his finger. After a long moment he spoke, his voice a dry rasp. "I don't want a meal, Warden." Jameson sighed. He'd heard this before, a final act of defiance. "Suit yourself. Starve, if you prefer." "It's not that," Tom said, finally lifting his head. His eyes were the color of a winter sky, pale and clear. "I want something else." "What then? A priest? You've refused him twice." "No." Tom leaned forward, and the lantern light caught the lines on his face, etching them deeper. "I want my photograph taken." The warden blinked. He'd been prepared for many requests, a bottle of whiskey, a letter to be written, a final cigarette. But this was strange. "A photograph? What in God's name for? You have no one to send it to." "That's my business," Tom replied, his voice steady. "It's my last request. I have a right to it." It was true. It was a tradition, an unwritten law of the frontier. A man's last request, no matter how odd, was to be honored. Grudgingly, Warden Jameson agreed. He sent a guard to fetch Elijah Carter, the only photographer in our small, windswept town. Now, Elijah was an artist, a man who believed a photograph wasn't just an image, but a captured soul. He arrived at the prison before dawn, his camera and tripod a clumsy silhouette against the first hint of light. He was nervous. His hands trembled as he set up his equipment in the prison yard, right next to the gallows that stood like a skeletal tree against the purple sky. The air was bitingly cold, and every breath hung in a cloud. They brought Tom out. He was wearing a clean, simple shirt they'd given him. He walked calmly, his hands shackled in front of him. He didn't look at the gallows. He looked straight at Elijah and his strange wooden contraption. "Where would you like me?" Tom asked, his voice surprisingly calm. Elijah, flustered, pointed to a spot against the stark prison wall. "There. Stand just there." He ducked under the black cloth. Through the ground glass he saw Tom's face, sharp and inverted. And he saw something else, a profound peace. This wasn't the face of a desperate criminal. This was the face of a man who had made his peace with the world. "Hold still," Elijah whispered, though he knew the exposure would take several seconds. Tom didn't just hold still, he became a statue. The only movement was the slow rise and fall of his chest. Click. The sound of the shutter was unnaturally loud in the silent yard. It was done. "Thank you," Tom said, and with that, he was led back to his cell. 2 hours later, as the sun finally crested the mountains, they hanged him. He went to his death with that same unsettling calm. No last words, just a final, quiet breath. The town moved on. That's what towns do. Tom was buried in the pauper's field, a simple wooden cross marking the spot. The photograph, once developed, was filed away in a drawer in the warden's office. A curiosity, a forgotten artifact of a closed case, but Elijah Carter, the photographer, couldn't forget. That face haunted him. He developed the glass plate negative himself, watching as the image slowly swam into existence in the chemical bath. Tom's face, his eyes, they held a secret. Elijah made a print for the warden, as was required, but he made a second one for himself. He couldn't explain why. He pinned it to the wall of his studio, and for weeks he would find himself staring at it, trying to decipher the mystery in the man's expression. It was a month later when a stranger rode into town. He was a U.S. Marshal, a tall man with a weary face and a badge polished to a shine. He went straight to the warden's office. "I'm looking for a man," the marshal said, laying a wanted poster on Jameson's desk. "Goes by the name of Silent, Sam Jenkins. Killed a sheriff in Colorado during a bank job 2 years ago. We heard a rumor he might have been caught out here for a lesser crime." Warden Jameson looked at the poster. The sketch was crude, but something about the eyes. He felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. He slowly opened his desk drawer and pulled out the photograph of Tom. He slid it across the desk. The marshal picked it up. He studied it for a long, long time. The silence in the room was absolute. Then he let out a low whistle. "That's him," he said, his voice filled with a mix of triumph and disbelief. "That's Silent, Sam. There's a $500 reward on his head, dead or alive." Jameson felt the world tilt. Tom, the quiet horse thief, he was a murderer, a wanted man. The pieces started to fall into place, the refusal to give his real name, the lack of family, the strange calm. He wasn't at peace, he was relieved. He had been running, and he had finally been caught for a crime far smaller than the one he'd committed. He had cheated the Colorado noose by walking willingly to the Wyoming one. But the marshal wasn't finished. He was squinting at the photograph, holding it closer to the lamplight. "Wait a minute," he murmured. "What's that?" "There, on his shirt." Jameson leaned over. In the photograph, just visible above the pocket of Tom's simple shirt, was a small, dark shape. It was pinned there, something they had all been too preoccupied to notice in the grim reality of the execution morning. With a magnifying glass, the shape became clear. It was a brooch, a tiny, tarnished silver brooch in the shape of a bird in flight. The marshal's face went pale. "That's not possible," he whispered. "What? What is it?" Jameson asked, his impatience growing. "This brooch," the marshal said, his finger trembling as he pointed to the photograph. "I've only ever seen one like it. It belonged to Maryanne Kellogg, the sheriff's wife, the woman Silent Sam was supposed to have killed that day in Colorado." The room seemed to grow colder. The two men stared at each other, the same horrific realization dawning on them. Tom, or Silent Sam, hadn't just killed the sheriff. He had killed his wife, too, and he had taken her brooch as a trophy, a sick keepsake that he wore, hidden in plain sight, to his own execution. The story should have ended there. A brutal killer brought to a kind of justice, a mystery solved. But Elijah, the photographer, when he heard the news, felt that same unease return. A trophy, worn so openly, pinned to his shirt for a photograph? It didn't fit the man he had seen through his lens. That man had sorrow in his eyes, not triumph, That man had peace, not cruelty. Driven by a compulsion he didn't understand, Elijah traveled to Colorado. It took him weeks. He found the town where the murder had happened, a place still scarred by the violence. He asked questions, quietly, carefully. He spoke to the old-timers in the saloon, to the former deputies, to the editor of the local newspaper. And the story he uncovered was nothing like the one on the wanted poster. He learned that Sheriff Kellogg was a cruel man, a tyrant who ruled the town with fear. He learned that Maryanne Kellogg was terrified of him, that she had been planning to leave. And he learned one more thing, a piece of gossip that had been dismissed at the time. A drifter had been seen in the area, a quiet man who did odd jobs, a man who had shown Maryanne a small kindness, fixing the wheel on her carriage, a man named Sam. The official story was that Silent, Sam Jenkins, had killed the sheriff during a robbery and murdered the wife as a witness. But the story Elijah pieced together was different. He believed Sam had witnessed the sheriff attacking Maryanne. He believed Sam had intervened. A fight ensued, the sheriff was killed, and in the chaos, Maryanne was fatally wounded, perhaps by a stray bullet, perhaps by the sheriff himself in his final moments. Sam, a drifter with a past, knew no one would believe his word against a sheriff's. So he ran. He took the brooch, not as a trophy, but as a promise, a memory of the woman he had tried and failed to save. He wore it every day, and on his last day he made sure it was visible in his photograph. It was his final confession, his only way to tell the truth, to connect his name to hers, without speaking a word that could be used against him. He wanted the world to see it eventually. He wanted someone to look closely and ask the questions Elijah had just asked. He wasn't a cold-blooded killer. He was a man who had tried to do a good thing in a bad world and had paid the ultimate price for it. The peace on his face wasn't the peace of a monster content with his crimes. It was the peace of a man who had carried an unbearable weight and was finally putting it down. He was ensuring that Maryanne Kellogg's story, the truth of her suffering, wouldn't die with him. The photograph was his testament. So, when you look at this photograph now, what do you see? Do you see a criminal? Or do you see a man, forever frozen in time, using his last breath to send a message into the future? He knew the camera was the one witness that would never forget, the one that would capture the evidence he couldn't speak aloud. We all leave behind shadows, traces of who we were. Most fade away. But sometimes, through a twist of fate, a single moment is captured. A look in an eye, a small silver brooch on a simple shirt, and that moment becomes a key, unlocking a truth that was meant to stay buried. It makes you wonder, what shadows are we casting right now? What silent stories will our own images tell long after we're gone? If this story made you see the past a little differently, if it made you think about the hidden truths lurking in old photographs and forgotten faces, then maybe share it with someone. Pass it on. Because history isn't just written in books, it's hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to look closely enough to see it. And if you want to join me as we uncover more of these lost stories, well, you know what to do. Subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one. The moral of the story is a simple one, but a powerful one. Every picture tells a story, but it's up to us to listen to the silence between the lines.